My family called me a liar before they even asked me what happened. That is the part I want you to hold on to. Not what was said about Marcus. Not the screenshots my cousin posted. Not the Sunday dinner where my uncle looked at me across the table and said he was disappointed in me. The part I want you to hold is the sequence. The accusation came first. The question came second. Or never. My name is Talia Brennan. I am 25 years old. I have brown hair that people call honey-colored when the light is right and olive skin from my mother's side, and I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a house with a screened porch and a mother who kept her opinions organized by volume. The louder she said something, the more certain she was about it. She was very loud in October. Marcus Webb and I had been together for 2 years when my cousin Renata decided she had something to say about it. Marcus is 30 years old. He is a physical therapist who runs his own practice in the Midtown neighborhood of Atlanta. He grew up in Columbus, Georgia. He has a degree from Georgia State and a license from the state board and a waiting list of patients that runs 6 weeks out. He is a good man. He is a careful and specific and warm man, and he is the person I chose and the person I am still choosing and the person my family told me I should be ashamed of, not because of anything he did. Because of something Renata said he did. Something he did not do. Something that unraveled completely when the facts were examined. Something that cost me 4 months of the worst relationship I had ever had with my own family before the truth came out. And cost Renata something considerably more significant than a bad 4 months. I want to tell you the whole story. I want to tell it in order, because the order matters. I should tell you about Renata first, because Renata is why any of this happened. Renata Caruso is my mother's sister's daughter. She is 28 years old, and she is the specific kind of person who has never been told no in a context that mattered, and who has consequently never developed the internal architecture that no builds. She is attractive, and she knows it, and she uses it the way some people use credentials, as an argument for why her version of events should be accepted without scrutiny. She had dated Marcus for approximately 6 weeks about 3 years before I met him. This was not a secret. Marcus told me about it in the early months of our relationship with the casualness of someone describing a minor weather event. He said they had gone on dates. It had not developed into anything real. They had ended it mutually and without drama. I believed him because the available evidence supported it. Renata had not mentioned Marcus in any of the years I had known her as an adult. She had not seemed to hold any particular feeling about him. When I brought him to a family cookout in the spring of our first year together, she had said "nice to meet you" and moved on, and I had thought nothing of it. What I did not know was that Renata had said something very different to our mutual cousin Brianna at a separate gathering approximately 2 weeks after that cookout. I did not know this until later. The things that happened in the fall had roots in the spring, and I was not watching the roots grow. The message Renata sent to my mother arrived on a Tuesday in October. I know it was Tuesday, because I was working from my apartment in Atlanta on a Tuesday afternoon when my mother called, and she was already using the voice. The voice that means she has decided something before she has said anything. She said she had heard something she needed to talk to me about. I said okay. She said she had received a message from Renata. I said okay. She said Renata had told her some things about Marcus. I said what things? My mother said Renata had told her that Marcus had been inappropriate with her. That during the time they were dating he had pressured her and made her uncomfortable, and she had ended things because of the way he had behaved. She said Renata had told her she had not wanted to say anything because she did not want to make things difficult, but that she felt it was her responsibility as family to make sure I knew. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said what specifically had he done? My mother said Renata had not gone into specifics. She said Renata had been very upset. She said the fact that Renata was upset was itself meaningful. I said I understood she was upset. I said I would very much like to know what specifically Marcus had done that was inappropriate. My mother said she thought the important thing was that I knew about the concerns. I said the important thing was accuracy. My mother said she thought I was being defensive. I said I was being interested in the facts. The call went on for another 20 minutes. By the end of it, my mother had not given me a single specific thing Marcus had done. What she had given me was an atmosphere, a concern, a family-level suggestion that I should reconsider. I hung up and I sat in my apartment and I thought about what I actually knew. I knew Renata had told my mother something. I did not know what that something was. I knew Marcus had dated Renata briefly 3 years ago and had described the ending as mutual. I did not know what Renata's description of the ending was. I called Marcus. I told him what my mother had said. He was quiet. Then he said, "What did Renata say he did?" I said my mother did not have specifics. He said he was going to need specifics. I said I agreed. I said I was trying to get them. I was trying to get them for a very long time. The specifics, when they finally materialized, were different from what the atmosphere had suggested. What Renata had said to my mother was vague. What she said to our aunt was slightly less vague. What she said to Brianna, who had been her original audience, and who eventually told me the whole sequence of events, was specific but was also, when held against the available record, not accurate. Renata's account, the version Brianna finally gave me in November, was that Marcus had become controlling during their 6 weeks together, that he had monitored her movements, that he had made comments about who she spent time with, that the relationship had felt unsafe. I took this seriously. I want to say that clearly. I took it seriously as an allegation and I thought about it carefully, and I talked to Marcus directly about it. Marcus's account was that the 6 weeks had been casual and had ended when it became clear they were not compatible. He said Renata had been the one who pulled back. He said the last conversation between them had been her telling him she was not feeling a connection and him saying he understood. He said there had been no conflict. He said there had been no monitoring. He said he had not contacted her after that conversation. 2 accounts. I needed something other than 2 accounts. I am not a person who accepts atmosphere as evidence. This is something I have in common with the civil engineer in an earlier story, though we arrived at it from different directions. I am a data analyst. I work for a research firm in Atlanta where my job is to distinguish between signal and noise. I apply that habit of mind to most things in my life. I applied it here. I asked Renata directly. I sent her a message that was careful and non-accusatory, and that said I wanted to understand what had happened so I could have accurate information. She responded with something that was emotional and not specific. She said she did not want to relive it. She said she had done her duty as family, and the rest was up to me. I said I appreciated her concern and I wanted to make sure I was responding to accurate information. I said could she help me understand the specific incidents she was referring to. She did not respond to that message. I asked Brianna what she actually knew, as distinct from what she had been told. Brianna was honest with me. She said she had not witnessed anything herself. She said Renata had told her the story at the spring cookout, the same day she met Marcus, and that the story had been different at that point than it became later. At the cookout, Renata had said something along the lines of, "Oh, I used to date him, it didn't work out." She had not said anything about feeling unsafe. The safety language appeared in later versions of the account. I wrote down the dates. I wrote down who said what when. I wrote it down in the same format I used for data at work. Observation, source, date, confidence level. The confidence level in Renata's account was low. Not because she was lying necessarily. Because the account had changed and the specifics were absent, and the timing was suspicious, and the one person who had been present at the beginning of the account was giving me a different version of it. I kept investigating. Because the family had not waited for my investigation to form its conclusions. The Sunday dinner happened 3 weeks after my mother's call. I had not planned to attend. My mother had insisted. She said it was important for the family to be together, and to talk about concerns as a family and family, that me staying away was not going to help anyone. I went. Marcus did not come. I had not asked him to come. He had offered and I had said not yet, not until I understood what I was dealing with. The dinner was at my Aunt Patricia's house. Patricia is my mother's sister and Renata's mother, and a woman who has strong opinions about what is owed to family and who expresses those opinions. at a volume calibrated to prevent disagreement. My uncle was there, my cousins were there, my mother was there, Renata was not there. That was the first thing I noticed. The dinner had been called in the context of concerns about my relationship, and the person who had raised those concerns was not present. I did not say anything about this at first. I sat through the opening of the meal. I waited. My Uncle Gerald spoke first. He said he wanted to say something, and he hoped I would hear it in the spirit it was intended. He said he was not trying to tell me what to do. He said he was concerned. He said when a family member comes forward with information like this, it deserved to be taken seriously. I said I agreed that it deserved to be taken seriously. I said I had been taking it seriously. I said I had been trying to get specific information about what exactly Marcus had done that was inappropriate, and I had not been able to get it. My Aunt Patricia said Renata was very upset about all of this. I said I understood. I said I was also upset because I had been told my partner had done something wrong, and 3 weeks later, I still did not know what that something was. My mother said sometimes people cannot relive these experiences. I said I understood that. I said I also could not ask my partner to defend himself against an accusation I had not been told the substance of. Gerald said he thought the issue was not the specifics. He said the issue was the pattern. I said what pattern? He said of someone making a woman feel unsafe. I said I had not been told of any woman other than Renata. I said I had not been given specifics about Renata. I said pattern required more than one data point, and I had not been given one clear data point. My mother said I was being very cold about this. I said I was being precise. I said precision was what fairness required when someone's character was being questioned. Patricia said she thought I should take some time away from Marcus while the family processed this. I said I appreciated the suggestion. I said I was not going to follow it. I said I had been with Marcus for 2 years and I had direct evidence of who he was, and I was not going to alter my life based on an account that had changed between tellings and that no one at this table had witnessed. The room was quiet for a moment. Then my grandmother, my mother's mother, who had been sitting at the end of the table and had not said anything, said, "Talia, what do you know that we don't?" I said I know that the story Renata told Brianna at the cookout in the spring was not the same story that is being described now. I said I know that when I asked Renata for specifics, she did not provide them. I said I know that Marcus has given me a consistent and specific account, and that account has not changed. I said I know the difference between concern and evidence, and this dinner has a lot of concern and very little evidence. My grandmother looked at me for a long time. Then she said all right. She said she was not going to say I was wrong. She said she hoped I was right. I drove home with the specific feeling of someone who has said the accurate thing in the wrong room. I had said true things. The true things had not been received. The family had made its assessment, and the assessment was that I was defensive and possibly complicit and certainly too confident in a man who had been raised somewhere other than where we came from. That last part was the part nobody said out loud. But I had heard it in the spaces between the things that were said, and I knew what it meant, and I want to be clear about what it meant. The concern about Marcus was not entirely separable from the fact that Marcus was black and I was not, and that in my family's specific cultural code that combination carried its own category of doubt that pre-existed Renata's account and that her account had activated. I am saying this directly because it is part of the story, and the story is not complete without it. Marcus and I talked about this. We had the conversation that needed to be had, and we had it honestly. He said he had been navigating this particular category of skepticism his whole life. He said it was not new to him. He said he was not going to pretend it did not exist, because pretending it did not exist was one of the options available to him, but it was not the true option. He said what mattered to him was what I believed. I said I believed him. I said I had looked at the evidence and the evidence did not support Renata's account, and I believed him. He said he appreciated that. He said it mattered that I had looked at the evidence, rather than just deciding. He said one more thing. He said he understood that my family was afraid. He said he knew what fear looked like when it was dressed up as concern. He said he did not hold the fear against them. He held the spreading of an inaccurate account against Renata. Those were different things. I thought about that a lot. The distinction between the fear and the account. The family had fear that was real, even if its source was not what they believed it to be. Renata had constructed an account that gave the fear a specific target, and that account was not accurate. The two things needed to be dealt with separately. I dealt with Renata's account first. I went back to Brianna. Brianna had been the original audience for Renata's story, and she was also the most honest person in the extended family, which is a quality that sometimes creates difficulty in families, but that was very useful to me in November. I sat with Brianna for 3 hours and I asked her to tell me everything, in sequence, from the beginning. She told me. I took notes. What emerged was a timeline that did not support the account Renata had given the family. The account Renata gave the family said she had felt unsafe during the 6 weeks she dated Marcus. It said she had ended things because of his controlling behavior. The account Brianna gave me was that Renata had been interested in Marcus and he had not reciprocated the level of interest she wanted. She said Renata had described Marcus as unavailable in the emotional sense, not in the monitoring her movements sense. She said the disappointment Renata had expressed at the time was the ordinary disappointment of a thing that didn't develop into what you hoped for. She said the language about feeling unsafe had appeared in Renata's descriptions after the spring cookout, after she had met Marcus as my partner. I asked Brianna if she would be willing to put any of this in writing. She said she would think about it. I said I understood. I said I was not asking her to go to war with Renata. I said I was trying to understand what had actually happened. She thought about it for a week. Then she sent me a message. The message was careful and specific. It said that the account Renata had given the family was different in significant ways from what Renata had told her at the time the events occurred. It said she did not believe the current account was accurate. It said she wanted me to have that information. I forwarded it to my mother. I also forwarded the notes I had taken. I said I was not telling her what to conclude. I said I was giving her the same information I had. My mother was quiet for a few days. Then she called. The call was different from the October call. My mother was using a different voice. Not the loud certainty voice. A slower, more careful voice that I associated with her when she was working through something. She said she had looked at what I sent her. She said she had also called Brianna herself, which I had not asked her to do and which I appreciated. She said Brianna had told her the same things she had told me. She said she had also called Renata. She said the call with Renata had been difficult. She said Renata had maintained her account. She said Renata had said Brianna was misremembering. She said Renata had said I was trying to discredit her because I was too invested in Marcus to hear the truth. My mother said she had asked Renata a specific question. She said she had asked what exactly Marcus had done that made her feel unsafe. She said Renata had given her an answer that was different from what she had told Patricia and different from what she had said to Gerald. She said the specific incident in the new version was something she, my mother, had not heard before. I said when did she say this incident happened? My mother said Renata had said it was during one of their dates. She said Renata had said Marcus had grabbed her arm when she tried to leave. I said had anyone heard this before? My mother said no. I said did she think it was accurate? My mother was quiet. Then she said she did not know. She said the account kept changing and she did not know. I said I had been trying to tell her that for 6 weeks. She said I know. She said she was sorry for not listening sooner. She said she had been afraid and being afraid made her accept things she should have examined. I said I appreciated her saying that. I said what happened next mattered because the family had formed an opinion and that opinion had been shared. She said what did I want her to do? I said I wanted the family to know that the account had changed multiple times and had not been consistent and that I had investigated it thoroughly and I did not believe it was accurate. I said I was not asking them to have a specific opinion about Renata. I said I was asking them to stop treating an inconsistent and unverifiable account as established fact. She said she would talk to Patricia. I said I appreciated that. She talked to Patricia. It took another 2 weeks and several conversations and the involvement of my grandmother, who had been the most measured voice throughout and who carried weight in the family that my mother did not. But it happened. The family consensus shifted from Talia is being defensive to the situation is more complicated than we understood. That is not a full exoneration. I want to be clear about that. The family did not hold a meeting and formally declare Marcus innocent and Renata wrong. What happened was quieter and more human than that. People revised their internal assessments and stopped repeating the account, and some of them reached out to me with versions of apology that varied in their directness. My Uncle Gerald sent a text that said he hoped things were okay. My Aunt Patricia had a conversation with my mother that my mother described as difficult, and that resulted in Patricia calling me to say she might have been too quick to accept what she had heard. Patricia too quick to accept something was a sentence I had never expected to hear. I accepted it for what it was. Renata's situation was separate and developed on its own timeline. What I did not know in November and December, while the family conversations were happening, was that Renata had been doing something beyond telling my family a story about Marcus. She had also been contacting Marcus directly. Marcus told me about it in January. He said he had not wanted to tell me while the family situation was still unresolved because he did not want to add more complexity. He said in retrospect he should have told me sooner. Renata had sent Marcus 3 messages over the course of November and December. The messages had started as what she described as an attempt to reach out and explain herself. The second message had escalated. She said she was going to continue telling her story to anyone who would listen unless Marcus agreed to meet with her. The third message was explicit. She said she wanted to meet. She said if he did not agree to meet, she was going to reach out to his professional licensing board with her account. She said she thought the board would be interested in hearing from patients who had concerns about a practitioner. I read the messages. I read them twice. Then I looked at Marcus and I said, has she actually contacted the board? He said not as far as he knew. I said, had he responded to any of the messages? He said no. He said he had saved all of them. I said we needed to call a lawyer. We called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Catherine Bright and she practiced civil litigation in Atlanta, and she was recommended by a colleague of Marcus's, who had used her for a contract dispute. We sat in her office on a Wednesday morning in January, and I showed her the messages. She read them carefully. Then she said this is textbook extortion. She said the third message was explicit enough that it crossed the legal threshold from negotiation to threat. She said this was not a gray area. She said we had 2 options. We could send a cease and desist and wait, or we could file a complaint with the police and pursue it civilly. She said the cease and desist was faster and less expensive. She said the civil path was more comprehensive. Marcus and I looked at each other. He said, what do you want to do? I said I wanted to do whatever protected him most thoroughly. He said he did not want to put Renata in criminal jeopardy if we could resolve it without that. I said I understood that. I said I also needed us to be protected. We did the cease and desist first. Catherine sent it to Renata's address on a Friday morning. Renata contacted her mother within the hour. Patricia called my mother. My mother called me. She said, what is happening? I said I sent you the messages. She said she had not expected this. I said I know. I said when someone sends your partner a message saying they will contact his licensing board unless he agrees to meet them, that is something that has to be addressed legally. My mother was quiet. Then she said Renata did this. It was not a question. I said yes. She said she had the messages. I said I sent them to her in the same email as the note from Brianna. She said she had not read all of it. I said I know. She read it then. She called me back an hour later. She was using the quiet, careful voice again. She said she did not know what to say. I said she did not have to say anything. I said I needed her to understand what had happened. She said she understood. She said she was very sorry. The following weeks were the most complicated of the entire situation. Catherine monitored for any contact from Renata after the cease and desist was delivered. There was none. Renata did not respond in writing. She also did not contact the licensing board. The threat had been the instrument. When the instrument was named and countered it stopped being used. What happened instead was a different kind of contact. Renata called my mother. She called Patricia. She called our grandmother. She told each of them a version of events that cast the cease and desist as an attack by Marcus rather than a response to her messages. My mother came to me with this, and I was grateful that she came to me rather than accepting it. I said, here is what happened in sequence. The messages came first. The legal response came second. The sequence is documented. If Renata's claim was that the cease and desist was an attack, she needed to account for the messages that preceded it. My mother took this back to the family conversations. My grandmother, who had been the most consistent voice of measured assessment throughout, asked to see the messages herself. I sent them to her. She read them. She called me. She said, Talia. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, this child has made some serious errors. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, I owe you an apology for not requiring more information sooner. I said, you asked the right question at the Sunday dinner. She said, I should have asked it earlier and louder. I said, thank you for saying so. She said, what did I need from the family? I said I needed them to stop repeating Renata's account as if it were established fact. I said I needed the people who had said things about Marcus based on that account to understand that the account was not reliable. I said I was not asking them to attack Renata. I said I was asking them to stop operating on inaccurate information. My grandmother said she would handle it. I believed her. She handled things. She had always handled things. She was the person in the family whose word had weight, and she used that weight in the following weeks to establish a new understanding of what had happened. The new understanding was not a clean exoneration. It was more like a revised atmosphere. The family stopped treating Marcus as a confirmed problem. They started treating the situation as one where things were complicated and the initial response had been too quick. Some of them reached out to me directly. The Uncle Gerald text. The Aunt Patricia call. My mother, who took longer than the others but who arrived at a genuine reckoning with her own role in how the 4 months had unfolded. Renata was not at the next family gathering. She had removed herself from the situation, and I did not know exactly what her internal accounting looked like. What I knew was that the external situation had resolved in a direction that reflected the actual facts, and that the person who had been harmed, most by the inaccurate account, had been named accurately. Marcus met my grandmother in February. I had not planned it as a meeting exactly. My grandmother had asked to have dinner, and I had suggested bringing Marcus in. She had said yes. We drove to Savannah on a Saturday. My grandmother made the specific dinner she made for people she wanted to know. The one that takes all day, and that she only makes when the occasion warrants the attention. The 3 of us sat at her kitchen table, and we talked for 4 hours. My grandmother asked Marcus direct questions, and he answered them directly. She asked about his work. She asked about his family. She asked about his experience of the preceding 4 months. He told her the truth about all of it. He said the hardest part had been watching me navigate something that I should not have had to navigate alone. He said he had tried to stay out of the way while I did the work, because the work needed to be done by me, and not for me. He said he was grateful that I had done it. My grandmother looked at him for a moment after he said that. Then she said, you gave her the room. He said yes. She said that tells me something about you. He said he hoped it told her something good. She said it does. After dinner she sat on the porch with me for a while. She said, Talia, I want to say something about what happened. I said, go ahead. She said the family was wrong to move as quickly as they did. She said it was not about Marcus specifically, and she wanted me to understand that. She said she knew it was also about Marcus specifically, and she wanted me to understand that too. I said I knew. She said the 2 things were both true. I said yes. She said she was sorry we had not been braver sooner. I said I appreciated that. She said one more thing. She said she had watched me these 4 months. She said she had seen me work through something hard without losing myself in it. She said she was proud of me. I said thank you. She said you handled it the way your grandfather would have handled it. I said that meant a lot. She said I know. She said that is why I said it. We sat on the porch for another hour. The Savannah evening was doing what it did. The particular quality of warm southern night that I had grown up inside and that still felt to me like something foundational rather than circumstantial. The sounds and the smells of the place where I came from. The place I had been trying to protect a relationship from for 4 months. Marcus came out to the porch after a while. He sat on the railing. My grandmother looked at him and then at me, and then she said, "I am glad you're both here." He said, "So is he." I said, "So am I." It has been 7 months since the October call from my mother. The legal situation is resolved. Catherine Bright closed the file in March when it became clear that Renata was not going to escalate further, and that the cease and desist had accomplished its purpose. There were no civil filings. There were no licensing board complaints. There was a documented threat that was responded to, and that stopped when it was named. My relationship with Marcus is what it is, which is to say it is the thing it was before October. A real and specific thing between two people who have chosen each other. With the addition of having been tested by something we did not choose and having come through it. He said once that difficulty either clarifies or distorts. He said it clarified us. I said I thought so too. My family is a work in progress. That is the honest account. Some relationships are fuller than they were before October because they were examined under pressure, and what was real about them proved durable. My grandmother and I talked more than we did before. My mother and I have had conversations we had not had in years. Conversations about what she was afraid of and why, and what it costs to let fear shape your response to information you have not verified. She is working on that. I believe her. She is working on it. Some relationships are thinner than they were before. My Aunt Patricia and I have a cordiality that is not the same as the warmth we had. Not because of what she said specifically, but because of what the Sunday dinner told me about how she thought and what she was willing to accept without scrutiny. Some things, once seen, are difficult to unsee. Renata and I do not have a relationship at this time. That may change. It may not. The cease and desist was a legal instrument, and the legal situation is resolved, and what remains is the human question of what you do with a person who spread an inaccurate account about someone you love, and then escalated it into extortion when the inaccuracy was challenged. I do not have a settled answer to that question. I am letting it rest until I have one. I want to say something about the work of the 4 months because I think it is the part of the story that matters most and that I have not yet fully named. The work was investigative and relational simultaneously. It required me to follow evidence where it led, regardless of where I wanted it to lead. It required me to hold 2 things at once: care for my family and belief in my partner, without letting the tension between them resolve into a simple choice about which one mattered more. I love my family. I believed Marcus. Both of those things were true, and they were not in conflict even when the family was treating them as if they were. What was in conflict was the family's initial account and the available evidence. That conflict was resolvable. It required time and patience, and the willingness to keep asking questions that people did not want to answer. It required not accepting atmosphere as evidence, even when the atmosphere was coming from people I loved. It required trusting my own analysis. That was the hardest part. Not harder than the specific conversations. Not harder than the Sunday dinner, or the call with my mother, or the January morning when Marcus showed me the messages. But the longest part. The most continuous part. The daily decision to trust what I had found rather than what I had been told. I am a data analyst. I distinguish between signal and noise. I applied that to this situation. The noise was loud. The signal was consistent. The signal was Marcus. He was what he appeared to be. That turned out to be the whole answer. All the investigation and documentation and conversations and family dinners and attorney meetings and grandmother evenings led back to that. He was what he appeared to be. He had been consistent and specific, and when asked directly about the account, he answered directly, and what he said did not change. The truth is the most stable thing there is. It does not need revision. It does not need different versions for different audiences. It just stays what it is. Marcus stayed what he was. I stayed what I was. The truth stayed what it was. Everything else sorted itself out around that. My name is Talia Brennan. I am 25 years old. I chose Marcus Webb and I am still choosing him, and my grandmother made her all-day dinner for us in February, and I drove home to Atlanta in the dark with the specific feeling of someone who did the right thing and arrived somewhere real. That is the whole story. That is everything. That is all of it. I want to tell you about this specific day in December when I understood what Renata had actually done. Not in the legal sense. I had understood that in January when Marcus showed me the messages. What I understood in December was the architecture, the full structure of what had been built, and why. I was at work. I was running an analysis on a dataset for a client project, and the work required the specific kind of focus that also leaves part of the mind free to run parallel processing on other things. I was thinking about the timeline I had compiled. The spring cookout, the October message to my mother, the family dinner, the messages to Marcus. I had been thinking about these as a sequence of escalating responses. Renata had told my family a story, and the family had responded, and then things escalated from there. That was the narrative I had been working with. But, sitting at my desk in December, I thought about the spring cookout again. Renata had met Marcus in April. By October she had sent my mother the message. 6 months, not immediate. Not the immediate response of someone who was distressed by seeing someone who had harmed her. 6 months of watching, and then acting. The timing of the October message was not random. Marcus and I had announced our engagement in September. Not publicly, just to family. I had called my mother in September to tell her we were going to get engaged, and that he was going to ask me formally. My mother had called her sister. Patricia had told Renata. The message arrived in October sector, 2 weeks after the engagement news had moved through the family. I sat at my desk and I understood what I was looking at. This was not a distressed account from someone who had been harmed and had finally found the courage to say something. The timing was too precise. The trigger was not seeing Marcus at a cookout. The trigger was the engagement. The engagement had changed something about Renata's position, and she had responded to the change. I thought about what Brianna had told me. Renata had been interested in Marcus, and he had not reciprocated the level of interest she wanted. 3 years later, he was engaged to her cousin. The specific cousin who was in the same family ecosystem, who would be at every holiday and every gathering and every occasion where the family assembled. This was not about safety. This had not been about safety from the beginning. This was about something else. Something that had been sitting quietly for 3 years and that the engagement had activated. I want to be careful here because I am speculating about the interior of another person and I cannot know what was actually happening in Renata's mind. What I can know is the behavior and the timing. The behavior was inconsistent with the account. The timing was inconsistent with a long-suppressed truth finally coming forward. What the behavior and timing were consistent with was a person who had wanted something she had not gotten and who had found a mechanism to complicate the situation when the something became permanently unavailable. That mechanism was the account. And when the account was challenged and did not produce the desired result, the mechanism escalated to the messages to Marcus. The messages were the attempt to create enough pressure to bring Marcus to a meeting. A meeting that I could only speculate about the purpose of. The cease and desist stopped the mechanism. What it could not do was change the 4 months that had happened before it. My mother asked me once in January why I had not led with the timing argument. She meant, why had I not pointed out immediately that the message arrived right after the engagement announcement? She meant, why had I spent weeks on the evidentiary argument, when the timing argument was simple and available? I thought about it. Then I said because the timing argument was circumstantial and the family would have dismissed it. I said the timing argument required the family to be willing to believe that Renata was capable of strategic calculation, and in October they were not there yet. I said the evidentiary argument required them to notice that the account kept changing and that no one had specific information. That was an argument based on what they themselves could verify. She said that was smart. I said it was what the situation required. She said she thought I was more patient than she would have been. I said I was angrier than I looked. She laughed. She said that tracked. Patience is not the same as the absence of emotion. I want to say that clearly because I think the way I have told this story might make me sound measured in a way I was not always measured. I was angry. I was very specifically angry at the family dinner when my uncle talked about pattern without evidence. I was angry in November when Brianna told me the timeline and I understood how long the account had been building. I was angry in January when I read the messages Renata had sent Marcus. I was angry in the specific way of someone who had done everything right and was still having to spend enormous energy addressing something that should not have required it. That anger was real, and it was legitimate. What I did not do was let the anger make my decisions. I let the evidence make the decisions and the anger give the decisions energy. Those are different jobs and they need to be kept separate. If I had let the anger drive, I would have said certain things at the family dinner that would have felt satisfying and been counterproductive. I would have led with the timing argument and been dismissed. I would have escalated when Renata's account kept changing instead of documenting the changes. The anger without the evidence would have been noise. The evidence without the anger would have been insufficient. You need both. You need to feel it and not be driven by it simultaneously. That is harder than it sounds. It requires a lot of mornings sitting with what you know and deciding that the way you deploy it matters. More than the satisfaction of deploying it immediately. I spent a lot of those mornings. Marcus was aware of them. He would check on me in ways that were present without being intrusive. He would make coffee and leave it on the counter and not ask questions. He would say, "How are you doing?" and mean it as a real question rather than a social formula and wait for the real answer. I told him the real answer each time. Some of the real answers were not good. Some of the real answers were that I was struggling with the specific combination of being angry and needing to be strategic, and it was costing me something. He said he knew. He said he was sorry I was in it. I said I was in it because I chose to be in it. He said I know. He said that made it worse and better simultaneously. He was right. It was worse and better simultaneously. That is the most accurate description of the whole 4 months. Brianna reached out to me in March after the legal situation resolved. She sent a message that was longer than I expected. She said she had been thinking about what had happened and about her own role in it. She said she had known something was wrong from the beginning. She said she had told me when I asked, but she had not told me until I asked, and she had not said anything to the family on her own. She said she was sorry for that. She said she was not sure what had stopped her. She said she thought she had been afraid of Renata, and afraid of the family response, and afraid of being the person who caused a conflict by challenging the account. I said I appreciated her telling me. I said I understood why she had held back. I said what she had given me when I asked was enough to work with, and I was grateful for it. She said she would not do the same thing again. She said if she saw something that was not right, she was going to say it earlier. She said she had learned from this that waiting made things worse and that the discomfort of speaking earlier was smaller than the cost of silence. I said that was one of the most useful things I had heard anyone say in months. She said she was a slow learner, but she got there eventually. I said she had gotten there. I said that counted. We have talked a few times since then. She is one of the relationships from this period that is different from before. Not thinner, actually fuller. We had a formal courtesy relationship before this happened. Now we have something more honest. I did not expect that outcome from these 4 months. It was not the point, but it turned out to be a real thing. I want to tell you what the 7 months cost and what they produced because I think both need to be said. The cost was the 4 months of the family operating on inaccurate information about someone I loved. The cost was conversations I had to have that I should not have had to have. The cost was the legal fees, which were real even if they were ultimately modest by the scale of what they addressed. The cost was the energy of doing the investigative work on top of a job that required investigative work and that I was doing on the same machines and in the same headspace. The cost was also something I am still accounting for. The specific change in how I move through family spaces. The awareness I carry now that the people who love you can form wrong conclusions quickly and hold them firmly, and that being right does not protect you from the wrongness of what they believe while they believe it. That awareness is not entirely a bad thing. It is uncomfortable and it is real, and it has changed the texture of some relationships. but awareness is usually worth what it costs. What the 7 months produced was several things. It produced a relationship with Marcus that had been tested under conditions neither of us chose, and that had come through those conditions as itself. That is significant. You do not always know what a relationship can hold until it is required to hold something. We know more now than we knew before October. It produced a relationship with my grandmother that is more honest than it was before. She was the person who asked the right question at the right moment. She was the person who held the thread when everyone else had dropped it. She is in her late 70s and she is one of the clearest thinkers I have ever known, and I did not fully understand that before this happened. It produced a change in my mother that I did not expect. She is working on the thing she identified in herself. The tendency to accept fear-informed conclusions without examining them. She has said so to me directly more than once. I believe her. I am watching. It produced something in me that I am still understanding. A clearer relationship with my own judgment. A greater confidence in the process of evidence-based assessment applied to my own life. I have always been good at this for other people's problems. I am getting better at trusting it for my own. My name is Talia Brennan. I am 25 years old. I have honey brown hair and olive skin, and I am a data analyst in Atlanta, and I chose Marcus Webb 2 years ago, and I chose him again through 4 months of difficulty, and I am still choosing him now. My grandmother made her all-day dinner for us in February. We drove home through the Georgia dark. The specific combination of good and hard that makes a real thing real. That is the whole story. That is everything. That is all of it. I want to tell you about the evidence I compiled because the compilation was its own kind of work and I have not described it precisely enough. I am a data analyst. I work with large data sets. I build models that distinguish signal from noise. This is my professional skill, and it is the skill I applied to this situation. I want to describe the application specifically. I created a document that I called the timeline. The timeline had columns: date, event, source, what was said, how it compared to other accounts from the same period, confidence level. The date column went back to the spring cookout in April. Every entry was documented with the source. What Brianna told me Renata had said at the cookout was a primary source account, meaning Brianna was there. What Renata told my mother in October was reported to me by my mother, making it a secondary source. What Renata told Patricia was reported to my mother by Patricia, and to me by my mother, making it a tertiary source. Data analysts understand that information degrades as it passes through intermediaries, not because people lie, because people filter. They filter through their own understanding and their own assumptions and their own emotional states. By the time a story has passed through 3 people, it has absorbed the filters of 3 people, and what you have at the end is not what was said at the beginning. The family had been working with third-hand accounts filtered through the specific emotional states of people who were frightened. The frightened filter is one of the most distorting. Fear selects for the information that confirms the fear and discards the information that would complicate it. I was working with primary and secondary sources. I had direct conversations with Brianna. I had the messages from Renata to Marcus, which were primary. I had Marcus's account, which I had tested against the available evidence, and which had not changed. When I put all of this in the timeline, the pattern was clear. The primary and secondary sources told a consistent story that was different from the story the family had received. The tertiary sources, filtered through fear, told a different story. This is not complicated as an analytical matter. It was emotionally complicated because the sources were people I loved and the subject was someone I loved, and the stakes were my relationship and my family and for months of my life, but analytically it was clear. I showed the timeline to Catherine Bright in January, when we went to see her about the messages. She read it carefully. She said she had worked with many clients over the years and very few of them came in with documentation this organized. I said thank you. She said it was not a compliment exactly. She said it was an observation about how the situation had been handled. She said it made her job significantly easier. I said I was glad something had been easy. She smiled. She said the timeline was going to be useful if things escalated further. They did not escalate further. The timeline went into the file. The file was closed in March. Marcus's grandmother called me in February. I did not know this was coming. Marcus had been in regular contact with his family throughout the 4 months and they were aware of the situation in general terms, but I had not met his grandmother yet. The call came on a Tuesday evening. He handed me his phone and said, "It's Grandma Jean and she wants to talk to you." I took the phone. Jean Webb is 81 years old and she lives in Columbus, Georgia, and she had raised Marcus after his parents' divorce when he was 9. She said hello. I said hello. She said she heard I had fought for her grandson. I said I had tried to. She said that was not nothing. She said she wanted to tell me something. She said in her experience the people who stayed were the ones who had to decide to stay. She said anyone could be with someone when it was easy. She said the deciding was what made it real. I said I understood. She said I think you do. She said I would like to meet you. I said I would like to meet her too. She said she hoped it would be soon. It was soon. We drove to Columbus in March. She made dinner. She is a very small woman with very direct eyes, and the specific quality of someone who has been through enough that they no longer see any reason to be indirect. She asked me questions during dinner that were direct and specific. She asked how I had handled the family situation. I told her honestly. She asked what had been the hardest part. I said the hardest part was doing the investigative work, while also being the person who was personally affected by what the investigation found. She said, "Why was that hard?" I said, "Because you want the evidence to tell you what you want to hear, and sometimes it doesn't, and you have to follow it anyway." She nodded. She said that was wisdom beyond 25 years. I said I was not sure about wisdom. I said I thought it was more like stubbornness about accuracy. She said sometimes those were the same thing. After dinner she sat with me on her porch. She said, "I want you to know something about Marcus." She said he has been through versions of this situation his whole life, and most of them he handled alone. She said the people he trusted most had not always shown up the way they should have. She said watching someone choose him and then do the work of choosing was something she had hoped for and had not known if she would see. I said he was worth it. She said, "I know." She said, "I am glad you know." I drove home with Marcus in the March dark, the Georgia countryside going past the windows. He asked what Grandma Jean had said to me on the porch. I told him. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "She does not say things like that easily." I said, "I know." I said I believed her. He said, "I know you do." He reached over and put his hand over mine on the gearshaft. We drove the rest of the way home like that. My mother came to Atlanta in April. She had not been since we moved in together. The visit had been planned before October, and then the October events had made it complicated, and then the complexity had gradually resolved, and she came in April. She arrived on a Friday afternoon. Marcus was at the practice. I picked her up from the airport and we drove to the apartment. She looked at the apartment carefully the way my mother always looked at spaces, assessing and noting without commenting immediately. She made tea when we got there. That was her way of settling into a place. She sat at the kitchen table. I sat across from her. She said, "I want to say something to you." I said, "Okay." She said, "I handled October badly." I said, "I know." She said, "I want you to know I know why I handled it badly." I said, "Tell me." She said she had been afraid. I said, "Of what?" She said of the specific combination of things that Marcus represented in the context of her own fears. She said she was not going to pretend those fears were rational. She said they were real, even if they were not rational, and they had shaped what she accepted without scrutiny when Renata came to her. She said she was working on that. I said I knew. She said, "I want you to watch me work on it. Not evaluate me. Just watch." I said, "Okay." She said, "I am going to make mistakes." I said, "I know." She said, "I need you to tell me when I do." I said, "I will try." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "You have always been like your grandfather." I said, "Which grandfather?" She said, "Mine." She said he was the one in the family who required evidence before he formed a conclusion. She said it was not always comfortable to be around. She said it was always right. I said, "Thank you." She said it was an accurate observation, not a compliment. I said I knew. I said I took it as both. Marcus came home at 6:30. He brought flowers that he had clearly purchased on the way home, and that were the specific kind of flowers my mother liked, which he had found out through me at some point and remembered. He said hello and asked how the drive-in had been, and made a point of not making the evening about the 4 months. My mother responded to that. I watched her respond to it. She asked him about his work, and he told her things about his practice that were genuine and specific, and she listened in the way she listened when she was actually taking something in. They talked for an hour before dinner was ready. At dinner, my mother said something I had not expected. She said she owed Marcus an apology. She said she had accepted information without verifying it, and she had allowed that unverified information to shape her response to him, and that response had not been fair. She said she was sorry. Marcus said thank you for saying so. He said he appreciated it. He said he understood that fear could produce responses that were not what a person intended when they had more time to think. He said he did not hold the fear against her. He said he held the choices under the fear to a higher standard, and the choice to come to Atlanta in April and say what she had said was the right choice. My mother looked at him for a moment. Then she said Talia chose well. He said he thought so. I said I was right here. They both said they knew. It was the first dinner in 7 months where everyone at the table was in the right relationship to the truth. I sat between them and ate dinner, and I thought about the specific cost of getting to a Thursday night in April in Atlanta where my mother and my partner could eat dinner together honestly. The cost was not nothing. The truth usually isn't free, but the Thursday night was real, and it was ours, and it had been built on accurate information, and the accurate information had been worth the work. Catherine Bright sent me a note in March when she closed the file. She said thank you for being organized and patient. She said those were not always qualities that appeared together in her clients. She said the organization had made the legal work efficient, and the patience had kept the situation from escalating in ways that would have been harder to unwind. I thought about patience again. I had thought about it many times during the 4 months. The patience that my grandmother said was the thing my grandfather had. The stubbornness about accuracy that Gene Webb had called wisdom. Patience is not passive. I want to say that one more time because I think it is the thing I most want the record to reflect. The patience required for this situation was active every day. It was the daily choice to do the next piece of the work, rather than the satisfying thing. It was following the evidence where it led, when the evidence was inconclusive. It was asking one more question when the temptation was to stop asking and start declaring. I am 25 years old. I have a lot of years ahead of me in which patience will be required, and in which the temptation to do the satisfying thing instead of the accurate thing will present itself. I am glad I have this experience to draw from. I am not glad it was necessary. Both things are true. Marcus said once that the things that are hardest to go through are the things that teach you the most about who you actually are. I said that sounded like something embroidered on a pillow. He laughed. He said it was also true. I said yes. I said it was both. He was right. The 4 months taught me who I actually was. I was the person who compiled the timeline. I was the person who asked one more question when the family wanted me to stop asking. I was the person who held on to what I knew was true while the people around me worked with what they had been told. I was the person who chose Marcus in October and chose him again in November, and December and January, and February and March, and who will keep choosing him because he is what he is. He is consistent and specific, and the evidence of him has not changed. My name is Talia Brennan. I am 25 years old. My grandmother made all-day dinner for us in February. Marcus's grandmother held my hand on the porch in Columbus. My mother sat at my kitchen table in April and said the right things. I chose accurately. I worked hard. The 4 months cost what they cost. The Thursday night in April was worth every bit of it. That is the whole story. That is everything. That is all of it. One more thing. The data analyst in me wants to close the record properly. What happened, in sequence, with the specific outcomes? Renata sent my mother a message in October. The message contained an account about Marcus. The account was accepted by most of the family, without verification. The family responded in ways that were based on the unverified account. Marcus and I navigated for months of that response. During those 4 months, I compiled evidence that did not support the account. Brianna provided information that was inconsistent with the account. Renata's account changed in significant ways between tellings. I documented the changes. I presented the documentation to my mother and eventually to other family members. The family's position revised. In November, Renata sent messages to Marcus Passon. The third message crossed the legal threshold into extortion. We retained Catherine Bright. She sent a cease and desist. The messages stopped. The licensing board complaint Renata had threatened was never filed. The legal file was closed in March without further escalation. The family's understanding of the situation now reflects the evidence rather than the initial account. Some relationships are fuller than they were before October, some are thinner. My relationship with Marcus is more tested and more solid. My relationship with my grandmother is deeper. My relationship with my mother is more honest. Renata and I do not have a relationship currently. I do not know what the future of that holds. I am not deciding in advance. That is the complete record. That is what happened and what it produced. The data analyst is satisfied that the record is accurate. The rest of me is just glad it is over and we are here. My name is Talia Brennan. We are here. That is the whole story. That is all of it.